Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into the Delphi murders.
Yeah.
The heartbreaking case of Abigail Williams and Liberty German back in 2017.
Right.
But we're not focusing on the guy who is currently charged, Richard Allen.
Hmm.
Instead, you've given us a stack of legal documents, specifically a memorandum,
Yeah.
and it argues that the investigation might have taken a wrong turn, possibly overlooking something pretty chilling.
What's fascinating about this memorandum is that it suggests the investigation might have missed a really crucial lead,
Yeah.
the potential involvement of a group practicing Odinism.
Odinism.
Yeah, it's a Norse pagan religion.
Wow. Okay. To be honest, I didn't know much about Odinism at all before diving into all this material.
Right.
It sounds kind of like, I don't know, something straight out of a thriller novel almost.
It does. It does has that feel, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the document lays out some very specific details, connections that raise some serious questions.
Right.
It argues that early in the case, there were strong indicators pointing towards Odinism at the crime scene itself.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Can
Right.
you kind of paint a picture for us of the crime scene?
Sure.
I vaguely remember, the basics of the case from the news, but
Mm-hmm.
remind me, what was so unusual about the scene itself?
Well, the crime scene was discovered about 22 hours after the girls went missing.
Right.
And the memorandum describes it as, well, ghoulish, for lack of a better word.
Us.
Liberty was found at the base of a tree,
Okay.
naked, positioned on her back with her left arm stretched above her head, like touching the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Her hands and her entire body were just covered in blood.
That's horrifying. And what about Abby?
Abby was found a few feet away, kind of at an angle to Libby.
Okay.
She was fully clothed, wearing Libby's sweatshirt and jeans. There was no blood on her clothing, which suggests that she may have been murdered naked and then dressed afterward.
Okay.
And no blood on her hands or her feet either.
Just around her neck where the.
Yeah, just around her neck where that fatal wound was inflicted.
So strikingly different treatment of the bodies right from the start.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And then there are those stick formations that were mentioned a lot in the news, too.
Yeah.
What did the memorandum say about those?
Yes, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The document really emphasizes how deliberate the placement of the branches were.
Okay.
Libby had 4 tree branches
Mm-hmm.
of varying sizes placed very specifically on her body.
Wow.
One long branch was kind of over her left shoulder, a smaller one was under her neck,
Okay.
and then 2 others crossed to form a V on her chest.
Jeez.
It was so precise that it almost seemed proficient.
Yeah, it's chilling to imagine someone taking the time to stage something like that. And Abby.
On Abby, there were 3 branches forming like an asterisk shape on her left side,
Okay.
and then above her head, smaller sticks were arranged to look like antlers.
Antlers. Wow.
The memorandum states that at least one of the branches on Libby and one on Abby looked like they were cut with a tool, not just broken by hand.
So adding another layer of premeditation to an already horrifying situation.
Absolutely.
What about that F rune that I remember hearing about
Right.
that was painted in blood?
Near the girls, on a separate tree, investigators found a symbol resembling the letter F.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 4 feet up the trunk. It was later confirmed to be painted with Libby's blood.
Okay, so we have this gruesome scene, the specific arrangement of the bodies, the sticks, the blood rune. It's hard to even wrap my head around it.
It's a lot.
Could one person, acting alone, have realistically pulled all of this off?
The memorandum challenges that very idea.
Okay.
It walks through the steps that would have been needed to stage this scene.
Like moving the bodies, posing them, finding the branches, carefully placing them, painting the rune.
Exactly, all within a very limited time frame.
Right.
The sheer number of tasks, the memorandum argues, raises serious questions about whether a single person could have done it all.
Especially considering that Sheriff Liggett, who led the investigation at the time, publicly insisted that Richard Allen acted alone, right?
He did, publicly.
Yeah.
But privately, he admitted to other law enforcement that multiple people were likely involved.
Wow.
That discrepancy alone is huge.
Right.
If more than one person was involved, the whole nature of the crime
Yeah.
and the motive behind it changes completely.
Okay, so let's dive into this Odinism angle you mentioned.
Yeah.
For those of us who aren't familiar, what exactly is Odinism?
Oh.
And why would it even be connected to such a horrific crime?
Odinism is a Norse pagan religion.
Okay.
It draws inspiration from ancient Scandinavian beliefs and mythology.
Mm-hmm.
It places a strong emphasis on things like warrior values, strength, courage, and a deep connection to nature.
Okay, so it's like a nature-based
Yeah,
kind of warrior, very masculine.
exactly. However, like many belief systems, Odinism can have darker interpretations.
Darker interpretations.
Yeah.
In what sense?
Well, you have groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC,
Mm-hmm.
which tracks extremist ideologies, and they've documented Odinism's association with certain white supremacist groups.
Okay.
They highlight how these groups, promoting hate and racial supremacy,
Yeah.
have kind of adopted and twisted elements of Odinism for their own agendas.
Right, for their own purposes.
Yeah.
And how does that pry back into the Delphi case?
One of the troopers who was investigating the potential Odinist angle, Trooper Murphy, stated that some aspects of what they were seeing
Oh, okay.
seemed to border on almost a satanic type of worshiping, sacrificing.
Wow.
And disturbingly, there's a lot of imagery online
Right.
depicting ritualistic hangings and sacrifices within certain Odinist circles, and some of it bears a chilling resemblance to what happened at Delphi.
That's incredibly disturbing. The memorandum specifically mentions an individual, Brad Holder, right?
Yes, Brad Holder.
Okay.
He is the father of Abby Williams' ex-boyfriend.
Right.
And, according to the document, was heavily involved in the Odinist community.
Okay.
The memorandum details numerous pieces of evidence potentially linking him to the crime.
Like what kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, his social media posts, for instance,
Okay.
are full of runes and symbols matching those found at the crime scene.
Uh-huh.
There's even a drawing he posted of a man hanging from a tree with a rune at its base, and it bears an eerie similarity to how Libby was found.
Okay, that's definitely creepy.
It is.
But wasn't Holder cleared as a suspect early on in the investigation?
He was, just a few weeks after the murders.
Okay.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Oh, okay.
The memorandum claims that early in the investigation, an expert from Purdue University was consulted about the potential Odinist connection.
And what happened? What did this expert say?
Well, that's the mystery.
Okay.
No one seems to remember who this professor was, and no report can be found. Trooper Holman, who was part of the unified command investigating the case, stated that the professor dismissed Odinism as a factor.
Okay.
But then you have Trooper Purdy, who joined the investigation later,
Right.
claiming that Holman told him the findings were actually inconclusive.
So we have conflicting accounts of what this mystery professor concluded.
Yeah.
A potentially crucial piece of information that's missing.
Yeah.
A suspect with numerous connections to Odinism and disturbing imagery mirroring the crime scene. And it was all seemingly just dismissed.
That appears to be the case, yes.
Wow. And it gets more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
The memorandum goes on to describe a whole network of individuals potentially connected to Holder and the crime.
Wait, so there could be even more people involved.
That's what the memorandum argues.
Wow.
There's Patrick Westphal,
Okay.
Holder's friend and fellow Odinist who lived in Delphi.
Mhm.
There's also Elvis Fields from Rushville, who allegedly confessed to his sisters about being involved.
Then you have Johnny Messer, who supposedly introduced Fields to this group, and Rod Abrams, Fields' roommate, who provided a false alibi for him.
So a whole web of potential suspects, all seemingly tied to Odinism, and the investigation just stopped pursuing them.
That's the argument presented in the memorandum.
Jeez.
It details specific evidence for each individual, highlighting their connections to Holder, to Odinism, and to the Delphi murders,
Right.
and questions why they weren't thoroughly investigated.
This is a lot to take in, and to be honest, it's pretty unsettling. We've barely scratched the surface here.
I know.
And we're already seeing a much more complicated picture than what was presented publicly.
Exactly, and it raises so many questions.
Right.
If there was a conspiracy to cover up these connections, why?
Yeah.
What was the motive? And why target Abby and Libby specifically?
I have a feeling those are questions we'll be grappling with as we continue this deep dive.
It really does. It really does
Yeah.
make you wonder. And it gets even more complicated when you look at how the investigation shifted focus to Richard Allen.
Okay, let's talk about that. You mentioned earlier that Richard Allen is currently the one charged in this case.
Right.
But this memorandum you're walking us through claims he's innocent.
Mm-hmm.
What's their reasoning there?
Well, the memorandum strongly emphasizes the complete lack of any evidence
Okay.
actually linking Richard Allen to the crime scene, to Odinism, or to any of these other suspects we've been talking about.
Right.
No DNA, no electronic evidence, no connections whatsoever.
So if all of this is true, what does it mean? Why would they target Richard Allen if there's no evidence against him?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The memorandum really digs into the evidence that was used to obtain a search warrant for Allen's home.
Oh.
And let me tell you, some serious red flags pop up.
Red flags? Like what kind of problems are we talking about?
Well, the affidavit that was presented to the judge relied heavily on a statement from a witness named Dan Dillon.
Okay.
He was a Department of Natural Resources officer.
Right.
Dillon claimed to have seen Allen on the trails near the crime scene around the time of the murders.
But didn't Allen himself admit to being in the area at that time?
Yes, but that's where it gets tricky.
Okay.
The memorandum points out some major issues with Doolin's statement.
Like what?
First of all, it was never recorded.
Hmm.
It was just a verbal account that he gave to law enforcement.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. Doolin couldn't even get Allen's name right in his initial report.
Oh, wow.
He called him Rick Allen instead of Richard.
Wow, so not exactly what you'd call a reliable eyewitness.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the craziest part is, this whole issue of Doolin's reliability is never even mentioned in the affidavit.
Wow.
The judge who signed off on the search warrant was led to believe this was solid evidence placing Allen at the scene.
Right.
But the memorandum argues that it's anything but.
So, yet another example of a potentially crucial detail being omitted or downplayed.
It seems that way.
Possibly to build a case against Allen?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so what about the blue coat? I remember that being a big part of the case against Allen, too.
You're right. That was another key piece of evidence.
Right.
There was a witness, Sarah Carbaugh.
Mm-hmm.
She reported seeing a man wearing a blue coat near the crime scene.
Right.
Sheriff Liggett, remember him?
Yeah.
Used this detail in his affidavit to connect Allen, who owned a blue coat, to the murders.
Didn't Carbaugh also say that the man she saw had muddy and bloody clothing, though?
That's what Liggett claimed in the affidavit, yes.
Right.
However, the memorandum reveals that Carbaugh never mentioned blood in her original statement.
Oh, wow.
She described the man's pants as muddy, but there was zero mention of blood.
Huh.
And here's the thing.
Yeah.
Liggett knew this
He did.
because he personally interviewed her.
So another potentially misleading detail in the affidavit.
It really seems that way.
And this is a huge deal because adding that bloody clothes detail lends a lot more weight to the prosecution's timeline.
Right.
And strengthens the connection between Allen and the crime scene. Without it, the whole thing starts to fall apart.
Yeah, it gets shaky.
It sounds like the pieces of the puzzle they used to build a case against Richard Allen are pretty shaky.
They are.
But if he isn't the perpetrator, then who is?
Right.
Does this memorandum point to someone specific as the likely killer?
It doesn't definitively name one single person,
Okay.
but it does lay out a possible scenario.
Right.
One that suggests a group effort,
Mm-hmm.
potentially orchestrated by Brad Holder,
Right.
driven by that twisted interpretation of Odinism we were talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
possibly with a goal of ritualistic sacrifice.
It's a terrifying thought. You mentioned earlier that Elvis Fields allegedly confessed to his sisters about being involved.
He did.
What exactly did he say?
His sisters reported that he revealed some pretty unsettling details.
Oh, okay.
He allegedly knew about the stick formations on Abby's head, for example,
Jeez.
and claimed to be part of a gang with a brother, which, lines up with the theory of a group effort.
Wow. Anything else?
He also asked Trooper Murphy a very strange question.
What was that?
Specifically, whether he could explain away his spit being found on one of the girls.
Ew, that's creepy.
It is, and to make it even creepier,
Yeah?
he had admitted to another sister that he did, in fact, spit on one of the girls.
That's chilling. And how does Elvis Fields fit into the larger picture with Holder and the others? Were
Yeah.
they connected somehow?
That's the most interesting part.
Okay.
The memorandum points out that Fields was following Brad Holder on Facebook. He even recreated some of Holder's posts, which suggests a direct link and a potential shared ideology.
Okay, so we've got social media connections, potential confessions, and a whole lot of evidence that seems to be pointing away from Richard Allen.
It does.
If this memorandum is accurate, it's hard to believe that the investigators wouldn't have explored these leads more thoroughly.
Right. It's mind-boggling, and it gets even more unsettling.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yeah. After Richard Allen was transferred to Westville Correctional Facility, he was placed under the watch of correctional officers who, get this, were themselves Odinists.
Wait, seriously, Odinist correctional officers?
Yes. And it wasn't just a subtle thing.
Okay.
They were wearing patches that openly displayed their allegiance in Odin We Trust, interlocking triangles, the whole 9 yards.
So this wasn't just a coincidence.
It doesn't seem like it.
Are you suggesting they were trying to intimidate the accused?
That's the implication.
Wow.
And it raises all sorts of questions about the integrity of the whole investigation if these claims are true.
Yeah.
It suggests that there was a deliberate effort to downplay any connection between the murders and Odinism,
Right.
even while potentially intimidating Allen.
It's just chilling. It feels like something out of a nightmare where the very people tasked with upholding the law are potentially complicit in a horrific cover-up.
It does paint a rather bleak picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it leaves us with a final haunting question. If these allegations are true, who can we trust to ensure justice is served?
That's a heavy question to consider. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I have to admit,
I know, it's a lot.
I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed by all the twists and turns in this case.
I understand. It's a lot to process.
Uh-huh.
But before we wrap things up, there's one more crucial detail from the memorandum that I think you'll find particularly disturbing.
Oh, there's more. Okay, what is it?
Remember those Odinist patches we were just talking about?
Yeah, those are pretty creepy.
The ones worn by the correctional officers guarding Richard Allen.
Yes.
Well, the timing of when those patches disappeared is even more unsettling.
Okay.
They were seen repeatedly during attorney visits, even when Allen's wife came to see him.
So it's like a very deliberate display.
It really was.
And then what happened? When did they stop wearing them?
They suddenly disappeared shortly after the defense team revealed to the prosecution that they were aware of the Odinist angle.
Wait, are you serious? So they knew they were being watched?
It seems that way.
That someone was trying to influence the case from behind the scenes?
That's the implication.
Wow.
And it goes beyond just intimidation.
Okay.
The memorandum describes these correctional officers actively interfering in Allen's meetings with his attorneys.
What?
Standing within earshot of conversations.
Wow.
Potentially monitoring or even disrupting their legal strategy.
That's outrageous. In the truth, that crosses a serious ethical line. It could even be considered obstruction of justice.
It certainly raises those concerns.
Right.
And it paints a very disturbing picture of a system potentially compromised.
Yeah.
Where those entrusted with upholding the law might be using their positions to protect a wider conspiracy.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a potentially flawed investigation, a suspect with no apparent connection to the crime,
Right.
evidence of potential intimidation and interference,
Yes.
and the chilling possibility of a group operating with impunity, even within the walls of a correctional facility.
And let's not forget the emotional toll this whole situation has taken on everyone involved.
Oh, of course.
The families of the victims are still seeking justice and closure.
Right.
Richard Allen is languishing behind bars for a crime he may not have committed.
Yeah.
And the community itself is living under this shadow of fear and uncertainty.
It's heartbreaking. And it begs the question, where do we go from here?
Right.
What can be done to rectify this potential miscarriage of justice?
Well, the memorandum is essentially a plea for a Franks hearing.
A Franks hearing.
Yeah.
Hold on, can you back up a second? What exactly is a Franks hearing?
It's a legal proceeding that allows the defense to challenge the validity of a search warrant
Okay.
based on evidence of police misconduct, like we've been discussing.
Right.
It's a high bar to clear.
Yeah.
But if successful, it could lead to the suppression of evidence obtained through that warrant,
Okay.
which could potentially unravel the prosecution's entire case against Richard Allen.
So it's a long shot, but it could be the key to getting Allen out of prison and reopening the investigation.
Exactly. The memorandum is arguing that the affidavit used to obtain the search warrant was so riddled with omissions and misleading information
Yeah.
that it violated Allen's Fourth Amendment rights, which protect against unreasonable searches and seizures.
And what about those other potential suspects? The ones with ties to Odinism?
The memorandum also calls for a renewed investigation into the Odinist angle.
Okay.
It urges law enforcement to take a hard look at the evidence linking Holder, Westfall, Fields, and the others to the crime.
Right.
They're essentially saying that this potential conspiracy needs to be taken seriously and thoroughly investigated.
It's mind-blowing to think that such a massive oversight could have occurred,
I know, really.
that so many potential leads were ignored. But the evidence laid out in this memorandum is pretty compelling.
It is, and it makes you wonder
Yeah.
if this could happen in the Delphi case, a case that garnered national attention.
Mm-hmm.
What else might be slipping through the cracks?
Right.
How many other investigations might be compromised by biases, oversights, or even deliberate manipulation?
Yeah. That's a truly unsettling thought. It makes you question the very foundations of our justice system.
It does, and it underscores the importance of critical thinking,
Yeah.
questioning assumptions, and demanding accountability.
Right.
We can't just blindly accept the narratives that are presented to us.
Right.
We have to dig deeper, challenge inconsistencies, and seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be.
It sounds like you're advocating for everyone to become their own armchair detective.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
We live in a world of information overload,
We do.
where it's so easy to get swept away by sensationalized headlines and prepackaged narratives.
Right.
But it's more important than ever to develop those critical thinking skills,
Yeah.
to question the information we're given, and to demand transparency and accountability from those in power.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But in a case like this, with so much complexity and conflicting information,
Yeah.
where do you even begin? It feels like trying to untangle a giant knot.
Well, in this case, the memorandum itself provides a sort of roadmap. It lays out the evidence, the connections, the inconsistencies.
Right.
It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the official narrative, and to connect the dots ourselves.
So we're all tasked with becoming amateur investigators, sifting through the evidence, and trying to make sense of this complex web of information.
Not necessarily, but we do have a responsibility to be informed,
Oh,
to be aware of the potential for manipulation, and to demand a justice system that is truly fair and impartial.
I agree with you there, but that's a lot to put on the shoulders of everyday citizens.
It is.
But I suppose that's the point of this deep dive, isn't it? To empower us with knowledge,
Exactly.
to encourage us to think critically, and to inspire us to seek the truth.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because the truth, no matter how disturbing, is always preferable to a comforting lie.
This has been a truly eye-opening conversation. But I have to ask, with all the twists and turns in this case,
Yeah.
with the possibility of a wider conspiracy, is there even hope for justice for Abby and Libby?
That's the question that lingers. The memorandum doesn't offer easy answers.
Right.
It simply lays out the evidence and challenges us to confront the uncomfortable possibilities. But within that challenge
Yeah.
lies a glimmer of hope, because the pursuit of truth, no matter how daunting, is always worth the effort.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah,
It's easy to feel disillusioned when faced with something like this.
I know.
But you're right, the truth is always worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And remember, this case is still unfolding.
It is.
The memorandum is just one piece of a much larger puzzle,
Right.
but it's a piece that raises important questions and demands further scrutiny.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What are the next steps in this whole process? What should we be watching for as this case unfolds?
Well, the most immediate thing to watch for is whether the court will grant that Franks hearing.
Okay.
If they do, that could be a major turning point in the case.
And what about the Odinist angle? Will that be investigated further?
That's the big unknown.
Yeah.
The memorandum makes a compelling case for a renewed investigation into the potential Odinist connections.
Right.
But whether law enforcement takes that seriously remains to be seen.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you think we should keep in mind as we continue to follow this story?
I think the most important thing is to remember the victims, Abby and Libby.
Of course.
At the heart of all of this is a terrible tragedy.
Yes.
And we can't lose sight of that amidst all the legal complexities and potential conspiracies.
You're absolutely right. Their families deserve justice, and we should all keep them in our thoughts as this case moves forward.
I agree. And beyond the specific case,
Yeah.
I think it's vital for all of us to remember the broader implications of what we've discussed today.
Okay.
The potential for oversights, biases, and even deliberate manipulation within our justice system
Right.
is a chilling reality that we need to confront.
It's a reminder that we can't just passively consume the information we're given. We have to be active participants, critical thinkers, and advocates for truth and justice.
Exactly. And that's the most powerful takeaway from this deep dive, in my opinion.
Okay.
The pursuit of truth is a shared responsibility, and we all have a role to play.
Okay, that's a lot to digest.
Yep.
So we've got this potential Franks hearing on the horizon, the possibility of a renewed investigation into the Odinist angle.
Yeah.
What else should we be looking for as this case continues to develop?
Well, one of the most crucial things will be to see how the prosecution responds to the claims made in this memorandum.
Okay.
Will they address the inconsistencies, the potential evidence of misconduct?
Right.
Or will they just try to double down on their case against Richard Allen?
And what about the families of the victims? What role did they play in all this?
Well, the families have been incredibly vocal throughout this whole ordeal.
Yeah.
In pushing for answers, for accountability, and for justice for Abby and Libby.
Right.
Their voices are incredibly important in this whole process. And I imagine they'll continue to play a significant role as the case moves forward.
You know, it's easy to get lost in the weeds with all the legal complexities and all the potential conspiracies we've been discussing.
It is.
But at the end of the day, this is about two young girls
Mhm.
whose lives were tragically cut short.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to remember the human cost of this tragedy.
Yeah.
The pain and suffering that the families have endured, the loss of two vibrant young lives. That's what should be at the forefront of our minds.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to acknowledge the impact this case has had on the community of Delphi itself.
Right.
It's a small town that was deeply shaken by these murders.
It was.
And the ongoing investigation has only added to the sense of unease and uncertainty.
You're right. The community has been grappling with fear, suspicion, and just this constant barrage of media attention for years now.
Yeah.
It's a heavy burden to bear. And I think it's important to remember the impact this has had on the people who live there.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to keep in mind? What's the lasting message you hope they walk away with?
First and foremost, I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to think critically
Yeah.
about the information you encounter, especially when it comes to high-profile cases like this one. Don't just accept the official narrative at face value.
Right.
Question the evidence, examine the inconsistencies, and demand accountability from those in power.
I agree. It's so easy to get caught up in the sensationalism and the emotion surrounding cases like this.
It is.
But it's vital to step back and engage with the facts critically.
Exactly. And secondly, I hope this has highlighted the importance of remaining vigilant and engaged,
Okay.
even when a case seems closed or a suspect has been identified.
Right.
As we've seen with this deep dive, there can be layers of complexity and hidden information that challenge our assumptions and demand further scrutiny.
You know, it's a bit unsettling to realize how much we might not be seeing, how much might be happening beneath the surface.
Yeah.
But it's also empowering to know that we have the ability to dig deeper,
Yeah.
to ask questions, and to demand answers.
That's the spirit. And
Right?
finally,
feel.
I hope this deep dive has served as a reminder of the human element at the heart of these stories.
Right.
Behind the headlines, the legal battles, and the potential conspiracies
Yeah.
are real people whose lives have been irrevocably altered by these events. We must never lose sight of that, and we must continue to advocate for justice and accountability for all those affected.
That's a powerful message, and I think it's a fitting way to end our deep dive.
Yeah.
It's been a long and winding journey, full of twists and turns,
Yes.
and I know I've learned a lot along the way.
I have too. And I hope you, our listener, feel the same way.
Yeah.
Remember, the pursuit of truth and justice is an ongoing process, and it requires all of us to be informed, engaged, and willing to ask the tough questions.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, keep digging, and never stop seeking the truth.